Hi friends! Alright, are you ready for your next few chapters of The Front Desk? When we left off, Mia had just met Hank, who is one of the weekly tenants at the motel. Are you ready? Chapter 3. Sign here on the dotted line, Mr. Yao said to my parents, presenting them with an enormous employment contract 6 pages long. My parents beamed as they proudly signed their names. Mr. Yao took the signed employment contract and stuffed it into his bag. Thank you so much, Mr. Yao, for giving us this opportunity, my father said. You don't know how much it means to us. He got choked up as he said the words. We promise we'll take good care of your motel, my mom added, and we won't let you down. Mr. Yao nodded and held up the manager's keys to the motel. As my parents reached for the keys, he held them out just out of reach. Everything that happens to this motel is your responsibility. You understand? He asked. Something breaks, you have to pay for it. My parents nodded. Under no circumstances are you ever to leave the motel unattended. Ever. One of you must always stay behind. Again, my parents nodded eagerly, even though I was thinking, wait, what? I can't go with both my parents at the same time? But what about Disneyland? But it was condition number 3 that really made my jaw drop. Mr. Yao turned to me. You cannot use the pool, kid, he said. Why not? I asked. If you use the pool, then all the customers will want to use the pool. So, think of all that water and the towels they'll be wasting, he said. It's not good for the environment. He frowned at him. I frowned at him. Somehow I doubted this was the environment. It was about the environment. She understands. You won't use the pool, will you, Mia? My mother shook her head at me. I glanced at my mom and the desperation in her eyes. Okay, I said. Good. Mr. Yao grinned, satisfied. He tossed my parents the keys. That night, the sweet smells of jasmine tea filled the front office. My parents only got the jasmine tea out for special occasions. We had packed a small tin of it before we left China, and every time something good happened, my mom would take out a few leaves and make some tea. I guess not a lot of good things have happened because there's still quite a lot left, but that was all about to change. Tonight, my parents poured generously from the tin. The calming aroma brought me back to my grandmother's house. All of us crowded around the table. At these big family dinners, my cousin Shin and I would always giggle and interrupt each other as we talked. I felt an ache in my tummy, razor sharp, at the thought of Shin. I still remember the day I left. I could see Shin's face pressed up against the glass by the security gate at the airport, blinking furiously like I was trying hard not to cry, or trying hard like he was trying not to cry. I was too. On the plane ride over, they gave us little packets of butter for our bread. Butter was very expensive in China, so I asked for extras and I put them in my pocket. I saved them for Shin for months in the fridge until I finally sank in that we weren't going back. So I ate them. My mother's voice jerked me back to reality. Hey, Mia, look here. Look at me, she said, smiling. Huh? I asked. I looked up to see my mother crouching in front of her front desk, holding her hands up like she was going to take a picture. It's this thing she does. My mom says it's important to take pictures of the nice moments in life, even if it's just in your head. As my mom pressed down on her pretend camera, my dad and I sat straight up and gave her very best smiles. Eggplant, she said in Chinese, and I giggled because even though that's what people in China said whenever someone took their pictures, it was funny hearing it in America. As my parents unpacked, I slipped out the back to find Hank. I brought him a cup of jasmine tea. Now that we were making $150 a day, surely we could afford to buy some more. I had seen a Chinese supermarket on the way over here. Hank's room was in the back beside the laundry room. There was a pot of cherry tomato plants in his front room. In front of his room, I knocked on the door. Hank answered on the first knock. His eyebrows shot up when he saw the tea. That's for me? He exclaimed. I smiled and handed it to him. It's from China, I told him. Get out of here. The guy next door opened his door to see what was going on. He was a white guy about the same age as Hank. He wore a Hawaiian shirt and had a small tattoo of a sailboat on his arm. The smell of popcorn drifted from his room. Billy Bob, Hank said. Meet Mia. She's the new manager. And look, she brought some tea from China. Good to meet you, Mia, Billy Bob said, extending his hand. I shook it. Pleasure's all mine, I said. Billy Bob smiled. Say, you're a lot nicer than the old manager. The last manager treated us like second-class citizens, Hank added. Really? I asked. Hank nodded. Carefully, he lifted the cup to his lips and took a sip. Oh, this stuff is good. Hank turned to Billy Bob. You've got to try this. More doors opened, and soon all the Weeklies were outside, talking and sipping the tea under the glowing crescent. Like Billy Bob, they were white too. Mrs. Q had long wavy hair that ran all the way down her back. Fred had a big belly and it shook when he laughed, and Mrs. T had glittery cat-eye reading glasses which she wore on the tip of her nose. Hank was right. They were all very nice. The Weeklies asked if I wanted to join them for a game of Monopoly, but it was getting late and I needed to help my parents unpack. I bid them all good night and was about to go back to the manager's quarters when I suddenly remembered. "Hey, Hank, what do you mean by what you said earlier about Mr. Yao?" I asked. "That he was anything but all right." Hank's jaw locked. "You'll find out soon, kid," Hank said. "The man has coal for a heart." Chapter 4. Hank's word thrashed around inside me. Mr. Yao was strict, sure, but maybe even a little dramatic. But coal for a heart? Hank couldn't possibly be right. This was the man who trusted us with his motel and letting us live there for free and was paying us $150 a day. The first thing the next day, I intended on setting Hank straight. But when morning came, my mother had other plans. "Let's go see your new school today," she announced. I groaned. Another grade, another year as a new girl. When we've moved as much as I have, checking out schools is like checking out shoe polish. So far, I'd gone to 4 different schools for 5 different grades. Dale Elementary was about 5 blocks east of the motel and a lot bigger than my old school. It was late August, so classes didn't start for a couple of days. As my mom and I walked across the big empty parking lot, I wondered what kind of kids were there. Nice kids, I hoped. We pushed open the door and the office at the reception. And the receptionist, a blonde lady with big curls that bounced as she moved her head, looked very surprised to see us. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Hi, I want to sign my daughter up for school. We just moved here," my mom said. The receptionist looked me up and down. I wiggled in my tattered pants and big old t-shirt from Goodwill. "I see," she said. She pushed a button on her desk phone and said, "Principal Evans, we have a new student here to see you." Principal Evans wore a blazer even though it was 90 degrees outside. She looked like what my mother calls a powerful white lady. She insisted on taking us on a tour of the school, even though my mom said we didn't need a tour. I could tell she was anxious to get back to the motel. "It'll only take 10 minutes, Principal Evans said, leading us toward the gymnasium in her clickety-clack black pumps. "So, Mia, tell me about yourself." I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, my mom blurted out, "She just moved here from China." Ugh, why does she always have to tell people that? It wasn't even true. We'd been here for 2 years. Of course, as soon as my mother said those words, Principal Evans started talking to me like I was a turkey. "Really? Wow. How do you like this country?" she asked. "I really like it," I quickly answered. Principal Evans put her hand on her chest and exhaled in relief. "You know English? Oh, that's great. I have to admit, we didn't get too many Chinese kids here. There's only one other Chinese kid in 5th grade. She smiled at me and added, "I'm sure he'll be thrilled you're here." On the way home, my mom and I played our usual game, looking at big American houses, trying to figure out who lived inside. "A family with 2 girls, my mom said, pointing to the pink curtains upstairs. "And a cat," I said. "There's a little door in the front." I turned to my mom. "Hey, why'd you have to tell the principal I just got here from China?" "So she'd cut you some slack." I stopped peering into the houses and peered at my mom. "What do you mean?" "You heard what she said. There's only 2 Chinese kids in your grade." "So? So it probably means most of the other kids are white." So they'll be better than you at English," my mom said, matter-of-factly. I looked at the ground. "Not necessarily," I said. "I might not speak native English like Jason, but my English is a lot better than when I first came, I think. Plus, I like English. I like how you could say a train of thought or a blanket of snow, which you couldn't in Chinese." But my mom didn't matter how much I liked English. My mom had already decided. "Necessarily," she said. Chapter 5. We were surprised to find the maid cart right where we left it when we got back. It had not moved an inch. In the time that we were gone, my dad had only managed to clean 2 rooms. "I don't know how he's going to get through all these rooms," he said, wiping his sweaty brow with the back of his hand. "I'll help you," I offered, rolling up my sleeves. In China, I sometimes helped my grandmother scrub the kitchen floor. "No," my mom shouted, "I don't want you near that stuff." She pointed to the maid cart filled with various colorful bottles of cleaning solutions. "Then I'll man the front desk," I said. I'll call you if I need anything." I ran out of the room and down the stairs before she could say no. "I've got this," I told myself on the way over to the front office. This was not going to be like the restaurant. This time I was going to not fail, and all I had to do was hand out keys and take the cash. How hard could this be? I got into position, climbing onto the front desk stool and crossing my hands on the desk. It didn't take long before the customers started coming. Unfortunately, when they saw me, the first thing they did was ask to speak to the manager. So I had to go get my mom. Up and down the stairs I ran. Every time she had to stop what she was doing to run down the stairs with me to the front office just to hand the customer a key and take the money. By the 5th time, I thought, enough. I made this little sign and I put it on the front desk. It read, "Mia Tang, manager." The next time a customer came in and asked to see the manager, I pointed to the sign and I stared really hard at him. In science class at my school, I learned that if you want a mammal to do something, you should stare at it. That's because mammals are social creatures, and we're really into hierarchy. At the top, you have your alpha, the leader, and then your betas, and then the omegas. The difference between an alpha and a beta is the alpha wins every staring contest. So I stared and stared until my eyes went blurry and I was starting to see double, and even then I refused to blink. Finally, the customer broke down and said, Okay, fine, I just need a room for the night." Yes, it worked. "That'll be $20 plus tax," I told him. I watched Jesse dug into his pocket, pulled out a 20 and a 5 and slid the bills across the desk. I gave him back his change and his key. The whole time I couldn't believe it was really happening. I was just a kid, but I asked an adult to hand me money, and he actually did it. I repeated my strategy with everyone else who walked through the door that day. Point, stare. Point, stare. Eventually, I didn't even need to stare. People just went ahead and gave me the money. I was so happy I hopped off the stool, opened up the vending machine, and treated myself to a cream soda. I got one for Hank, too, and went to find him. Unfortunately, he wasn't home. Fred, one of the other weeklies, said he was working and wouldn't be home until late. When I got back to the front desk, the phone was ringing. The Calvista had an old-fashioned orange phone with a ton more buttons than a usual one. I didn't know what the extra buttons did, but for a second I fantasized that if we pushed the wrong button, the motel would start flying. "Hello?" I asked, picking up the receiver. "Is this the front desk?" a voice asked. I looked at the glowing light and saw that it was a call coming from room 6, which I had just rented to Mr. Steen. I cleared my voice. "Mr. Steen, how can I help you?" I asked, putting my best customer service voice. "I need a wake-up call tomorrow at 5 a.m., Mr. Steen said. "Wake-up call, 5 a.m., I repeated. "You got it." "Don't forget, I have a very important meeting. I promised, and I wouldn't, and hung up. For the next half an hour, I studied the complicated phone system. There was a manual in the drawer, but it was one of those manuals that was impossible to read. It was like the manual they wrote for the walkie-talkies my mom used to make in the factory in China. Her walkie-talkies were great, but when they shipped to America, nobody could figure out how they worked because the manuals were full of typos and mistakes. I chuckled and wondered if the Calvista phone system was also made in China, like me. It made me feel strangely close to it. "All right, old friend," I said to the phone system, "let's do this." I punched in the code for the wake-up call and entered the room number and the time. To my amazement, the phone system made a beep. It worked! Pride swelled inside me as I drifted off to sleep that night. It was a glorious first day. I rented out 12 rooms, 7 of which I'd done all by myself. Not only that, I'd gotten the phone system to work. I didn't need to worry about getting up early to wake up Mr. Steen. I could sleep easy, knowing the awesome phone system would do it for me. Then morning came. All right, friends, that's it for today. I'll see you tomorrow with your next few chapters.